Great. Nate, did you send an agenda for today? I'm sure it's the same as last time. I can just work off of an old one.
I can
Maybe I just missed it.
I'll send it again in a minute.
Thanks. So, hello, everyone.
Uh,
This is the Zoning and Housing Subcommittee of the Amherst Planning Board. It is Thursday, February 26th at 11:35 a.m. We'll start with a roll call vote. So, Fred, please indicate if you're here.
I am.
Angus?
Present.
Hi, Jesse Major, present. And Bruce Coldham is not present at the moment. Okay. Any announcements from anybody? Not seeing anything. I did start to work on the minutes again and realized we actually have quite a few sets of minutes that are still in draft form. So I think I'd shared those all with you, Nate, just so they were somewhere. I did make 3 new sets, which I need to go through and edit. But maybe, Nate, you can help me remember in advance of next time we meet. Maybe we can send around 3 or 4 of the draft minutes for approval next time.
sure. Yeah, sorry, and I just sent the wrong agenda. So let me
No problem. I mean, it's the same topics probably, right?
yeah, this one was from a year ago, February 26th of 25. So I thought I had sent it, but
Hopefully
maybe
it's not entirely the same topics, but it might be.
uh, it's it's a little different. Yeah, I mean, it was just the zoning priority. So I don't have, we can go down the list. I think some of it was picking up with, there was 4 or 5 for the subcommittee. Do we, stick with mixed use buildings? Do we go down through the rest of them? I think for mixed use buildings, um, I had some draft language I was gonna share with the planning board, and that'll wait till next week. I think another consideration is that even if we change um, the permitting in those few districts, their dimensional standards, specifically additional lot area per unit, that's going to probably restrict or disincentivize mixed use buildings. So, if we change the 30%, to something else, whether it's a waiver or 75% or something of the facade, in the commercial district, it's 4,000 square feet per additional unit, and for RVC, it's 2,500, and that's restricted right there. So I think I think we have to address that in whether I've talked
Do
to
you
some
want
staff, and some staff recommends just waiving it or not having it there at all for
the commercial requirement at all?
the additional lot area per
Oh,
unit.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I would be in favor of that.
Would that waiver be in the use classifications table, or would it be in the dimensional standards table?
Yeah, let me share my screen.
Sure. I think I am, I would lean, I think, guessing with Angus on this one that the fewer waivers and the more clear, here's what it is probably better, right?
Yeah, so right now here's the dimensional table. If that's visible, I can.
Yeah.
So in the commercial right here, it's 4,000 square feet for additional lot area, and so for instance, like if you look at BVC, there's an A and a B, which allows a foot, I'll say a footnote, which allows it to be modified. So in the, BL and COM, there isn't any. And, I think the thought at one point was, well, let's, do we want a lot more, a lot of residential units in the commercial district? I think that was the thought. There's been discussions over the years, should this be changed or could it be for both BL and COM? And so I think, what we were saying for mixed use buildings, if I just scroll up here, it stays the same in I think we were saying it's going to stay the same in the 30% would be the same in BG and BL. But in these other districts, RVC, BVC, BN, and COM, it would still be site plan review, but instead of this 30%, it could be something different.
Right.
So I think even relaxing this 30% in these other zoning districts won't have an impact if we don't change that additional lot area component. And so, the way we've handled it in our bylaw is through waivers. It could be a special permit waiver. It could be, we could um, get rid of it. We could, have another footnote and say excludes mixed use buildings. Um,
Actually, that's maybe a clean way to do it, right? If it excludes mixed use buildings, then there's no waiver required because it excludes mixed use buildings, right?
yeah, I'm curious, it's one of those things where, so we have these are the footnotes. And so, yeah, would we have I don't know why I think, look, we used to have all the way to M. I think we actually had to O and we reduced it. So now we still have, but you could, for instance, have a footnote in some of these and say, well, especially in commercial and RVC, have a footnote and say, excludes mixed use buildings, or is it okay if we don't have anything here?
Right. So
And
yeah, I was just saying that too. It's like, what is the rationale for leaving it at all, right?
it's to limit development. So
Yeah,
really what it does is, you have a commercial property. So it used to be that in the commercial zone up until a few years ago, you can only have 4 units above the first floor and, then a special permit and then this additional lot area. So, you have a property in the BL or COM downtown and it's pretty big and you only can get 5 units on it because, you know,
yeah. Angus, go ahead.
Could I could I ask a clarifying question?
mhm.
What Nate, could you explain to me what the additional lot area per family square foot means exactly?
Yeah, so it's if you have your minimum lot area,
Right.
it's 20,000 for the first unit. And then if you want to have additional units, it has to have this additional lot area. So if you take the commercial, for instance, if you have a 30,000 square foot lot, you'd have 20,000 for one unit, and then you'd have, 4,000, 4,000. So you'd have, you can only get 3 units on that property because you have to, it's 4,000 for each additional unit above the first.
Three housing units?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, and in like in com that would be exclusively in a mixed use building.
Or any residential units. It's any residential unit, any residential use type that's allowed.
Okay, I can't remember if what residential buildings are allowed in com, but
Right.
okay.
It's the same principle through all of this, right? So like in
Right.
low density residential, you need 80,000 and then 10,000 additional, so if you were to do a duplex, for instance, in RLD, you'd need 90,000 square feet. If you wanted to do a duplex in RO, you need 40,000. If you want to do a duplex in RN, you need 26,000. If you want to do 3 units in RN, you need, 32,000. If you wanted, and so the idea was it's a way to try to, um, so it's like a density calculation, which, may work or may not work, right? And there's other ways to do it. You can do, units per acre, you could do square foot floor area ratio, or you could just say, you know, say what we're looking at for mixed use buildings. Is it okay in these areas, RVC, COM, BVC, and BN? BVC and BN are funny. They have these little footnotes, A then B, so that, essentially these can be modified in those districts.
I mean, if the goal here is to get more housing in these areas, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's what we're talking about.
Right, right.
Um, part of me thinks, well, let's just take out this requirement and sort of see what we get.
Yep.
And then after the first project where we're like, oh, this is crazy, maybe we consider it, but I can't imagine it ever really going there, to be honest.
Yeah.
Not a huge number of places we're talking about, and like, yeah.
And I think what we've seen too is, we have parking requirements in the commercial district for commercial uses. and anyone who has a requirement for mixed use building to have so much space, they're going to need, if you take a property, they might need 10 to 15 commercial parking spaces and then maybe a few residential. So there's already some other factors that will address the build out of a property.
Yeah.
And the dimensional standards, right? So in COM, you have 35% building coverage, 70% lot coverage. So, so it's like coupled, you take your additional lot area plus your maximum building and lot coverage, you're already, essentially you probably can't even get to, 35% building coverage or 70% here with this, you know, the 4,000 extra square feet, right? Like unless you're going to do a really big commercial building.
So are there thoughts on what we would reduce these to?
So I think I heard Jesse just say we get rid of them. And it could be that we do it for specifically mixed use buildings. In those few districts, there's not a lot of other residential uses allowed. And is it, I was gonna pull up. I mean, is it, are we worried about some of that? I don't know. I mean, townhouses are allowed, but by special permit. Apartments are allowed in some by special permit. I mean,
Yeah, what's the thing that's not allowed that would, if we eliminated it?
I think,
Is it
yeah,
a
I think,
bigger apartment building? Like what's the fear?
yeah, I think maybe you'd be like, oh, well, now in, RVC, apartments are site plan review. And so right now in RVC, we have this additional 4,000. So, you have an acre property, you get so many units, and now someone would be like, oh, we get this. I think we'd be looking on the ground. I'm not even sure in our RVC districts if the properties are even that big. So, I think some of the properties might be like, 30,000 square feet. So right now they're limited to like, 4 or 5 units. And is that okay? Or do we want to encourage, we cap a 20 apartment building at 20 units anyway, so we're not going to get more than a 20 unit apartment building. And we already cap townhouses at so many, so we're not going to get, more than 10 townhouses. I mean, so the bylaw has all these different, factors, but like right now in the commercial, if someone had a 30,000 square foot property, even if they thought they could do 10 houses, 10 townhouses, or something, they're limited to 3 units.
Right, so let's say we eliminate it, and then someone comes and says, yeah, I have 30,000 square feet, I'm gonna do 10 townhouses.
Mhm.
Is there another lever that maybe requires some approval, or then that's just site plan review?
Townhouses are, depending on what district it's all special permit and what we're
So then-
looking at. So it's still a special permit from the ZBA.
Right, so nothing's really gonna happen there that would be totally out of something new without a special permit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, we're not changing the permitting pathways, right? So even like a mixed use building, an RVC is a special permit and the rest of them is site plan review. So I think the thought was, well, right now the 30% we've heard is a barrier because, the ground floor is that's a lot for a minimum. So we're like, okay, well, let's adjust the kind of that, the formula for the non-residential space. But I think, we've also heard, and after talking with staff, that these additional lot area units or measurements have been really restrictive.
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like if we're going to do it, we might as well figure out what are all the components that need to be adjusted.
Agreed. Yeah, go ahead, Ings.
So just to clarify, Nate, the suggestion here is that we're looking at reducing or eliminating the additional lot area per family for RVC, for COM, and for BL. Is that right? And maybe
so
BBC?
I guess that's a question. I mean, right now, what we were focused on was changing. Let me just get, I can, this is, sorry, in, let me just quickly format this. So this, we're only changing it in RN or RVC. And then we're not changing BL or BG. And then we would change in terms of the mixed use building standards, the non-residential. So it'd be applying it in 4 zoning districts. And so, we're changing that 30% in the RVC, COM, BBC, and BN. Well, that's the kind of the preliminary recommendation.
Right.
And we still leave the 30% in the BG and BL for mixed use buildings. And so now the question is, what do we do with this additional lot area? Do we also just change it in these corresponding districts, or do we then change it to other ones as well?
Do you happen to have a map handy with the districts?
I do. I mean, we have heard that the BL downtown, this has been a limiting factor as well. I'm not sure, are we ready to, make that sweeping change? The footnote A and B have worked. So if it's a site plan review use, then the planning board acts as a special permit granting authority, right? So, it's happened, say, like, Archipelago's not the best example, but down in, by Atkins, it was a special permit use. They wanted some waivers using these footnotes. So the planning board would have acted as a special permit granting authority in that instance. If it's a special permit use, the ZBA handles it. So that's one way to do it. We could put A and B by these. So,
Yeah.
they're still there, and we're using, or whatever. We could just put an A. We don't have to use the B, whatever, however we want to make that work.
Well, if we add more footnotes, then it's less work for planning board anyway, right? So it goes to ZBA. Angus, your hand still up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this additional lot per family requirement applies specifically and only to housing, right?
Well, yeah, it's for dwelling units.
Right. So, to me, it's consonant with the goals of the housing production plan, with our stated priorities and with the master plan to focus on increasing density in built up areas. And all of these zones are already built up, and eliminating those additional lot requirements we would not allow building up of other kinds of buildings, right? It would be solely for housing. It would enable new kinds of housing options in both mixed use buildings and other kinds. So I think my preference would be not to do a footnote, but to just eliminate those additional lot requirements in those 4 zones.
Yeah, it's interesting. We see here footnote B, says applies to residential uses only. And then it says in the BG, BBC, BN, the basic minimum lot area applies to the first unit on the ground floor for townhouses, apartments, buildings containing dwelling units in combination with stores or other permitted commercial uses, so mixed-use buildings, and other permitted multi-residential uses in these districts. The basic minimum lot area, additional lot area, basic minimum lot frontage shall not apply. So essentially, we could put the footnote B up there, modify this to say in the RVC and commercial, or however we wanted to, and so we could modify footnote B so it doesn't need a special permit, right? Could modify footnote B and then put it here and here. It's already here, A and B, for these 2 districts. So do we then just have a footnote B here and here? It could be that we put it here too. It's like one of those things. It's like, I hear what you're saying, that it's like the easiest thing might be to eliminate this altogether. And maybe that's the first suggestion we bring to the planning board. And the next one is something else. It's one of those things where I feel like if we said, let's just eliminate this altogether, is it going to become, a protracted discussion, outside of, here in the planning board? Is most people going to be really worried about that?
So another way, sorry, one comment first. Hi, Bruce.
That's fine.
Just noting Bruce arrived at 11:50.
All right.
Maybe. The other way to approach this, Nate, keeping in mind what you just said, which I totally agree, if we want to make a change, we should do it in a way that might happen quickly. Could be to propose we add the footnote and continue discussion about removing it altogether. So that way, maybe adding the footnote would be more quickly accepted and get to council for approval. And yeah, maybe it's on our 4 or 6 month goal to continue that discussion and maybe actually propose we eliminate it. Because I do agree on making things simpler is better.
Yeah, Bruce, just a quick background. We are talking about the mixed use buildings, and if we change the non-residential formula, whether it's a waiver to the 30% or the 75% of the facade to a certain depth, what staff has discussed is that this additional lot area is also a barrier. So even changing the non-residential formula is not going to incentivize those buildings in these districts if we don't address, especially in commercial and RVC, address this, these numbers. And so we're talking
Okay.
about, do we modify footnote B to apply to that and put it up above, or do we just eliminate this altogether for any uses? So there's no additional lot area in these districts altogether, which
Okay.
impacts more than just mixed use buildings, right? It then makes it easier for townhouses, apartments, and other residential uses that are permitted.
But again, I think Angus just said it very clearly that that's one of our goals. So that to me is very much in alignment with increasing housing to take it out, which would allow these other types.
Right.
But you're saying that won't be a quick change. Nate, you're suggesting it'll lead to all kinds of more conversations.
Yeah, I have a feeling if we said, in the commercial district in RVC, we no longer have additional lot area per unit. It's just not there. It's not there in a few others. Someone's going to say, oh my gosh, now in the commercial district, we're going to get, all these apartment buildings, on these small lots because now, they don't have to get that additional lot area. And I guess that's where the map comes into play. We could say, well, that's a possibility. We still cap, the apartments to 20 units a building, and there's, the commercial districts are all in our village centers. So, I don't know, like, I agree. Is it, and there's, in the commercial district, like in the commercial district, apartments aren't even allowed. So, maybe maybe it's mixed use buildings or townhouses become something different. I don't know. I'm just,
Mary, Irene, I've suddenly realized I have a planning board
Angus.
meeting. Could you?
Yeah, so Nate, maybe I'm not trying to be too dense, but I'm just trying to understand this footnote.
yeah.
So the footnote applies to residence uses only, at least the second one, the footnote B, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But then also it applies to mixed use buildings, it looks like.
Yep.
And this additional lot area per family also only applies to residential uses and to mixed use buildings, correct?
Yeah, anything with a dwelling unit. So, single family, it'd be like a duplex,
Right.
townhouse, converted dwelling, subdividable dwelling.
So I guess I totally get that merely, adding a couple of zones to that footnote might be more palatable, and I'm open to that. At the same time, I just want to be clear, if we were to eliminate these additional lot area per family requirements, it would be effectively the exact same thing as adding it to the footnote, which exempts
Yeah.
residential uses from additional lot area per family requirements. Right? I mean, the footnote does a few more things. It exempts from
Right.
basic minimum lot area. It exempts from basic minimum lot frontage. So I can
Right.
see a benefit to maybe that's actually a more expansive change, but at least in terms of the additional lot area per family, adding more zones to that footnote is the same thing as eliminating that requirement, correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It's yeah, I wish the footnotes are so strange. So if we look at let's look at BVC. So there's footnote B up here for the basic minimum lot area, right? So then you'd go down to footnote B and you'd say, okay, it's listed here. The basic minimum lot area does not apply. And then it's like, and furthermore, for all these additional uses, townhouses, apartments, mixed use buildings, and other multi-unit residential uses allowed in those districts, which could be like a duplex, right? Not only does the basic minimum lot area doesn't apply, right? Additional lot area and basic minimum lot frontage doesn't also apply. the funny thing is then when you go to the additional lot area, this is where I think it's so strange. It's A then B. So, some people have said, well, now this additional lot area still applies, but it can only be modified if it's a special permit. The footnote A regulates the footnote B. And so it's been, interpreted differently about, you know, so, if I
Yeah,
were to read that, I'd say, well, no, this doesn't apply. And others would say, wait a minute, there's this footnote A. And they'd say, wait so I feel like the building commissioner has the way he interprets it now. It was interpreted differently before. And other staff have different opinion on it. I think it's kind of messy. So
Agreed.
yeah, I would, yeah, I would say let's try and eliminate it, the requirement. And I think if we craft the statement as we're eliminating this, but remember there are these other checks in place, like you just described to us. So it's really not that consequential. It will allow these very specific things, which are part of the housing production plan. So I think there's a pretty clear, justifiable argument for that.
Can I just add one other thing, which is I think if the town council shoots down this, then I think any changes to the mixed use development are likely to be shot down. I mean, that's just my personal thinking.
So I'm gonna just stop sharing for a minute. I just want to start typing a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess what was the I just want to jot down what we were saying as the possible ideas. And it sounds like it was
You
maybe
mean-
eliminating,
You mean strategies for getting this done?
or what were the you just said, Jesse, let's just try to
All right, let's try and eliminate the requirement for in these 3 zones for the additional unit. Additional square footage per unit. Because there are these other limiting factors that you described to us already.
Right.
Zoning. And it would allow for other apartment types or housing types, which are all within and described in the housing production plan as goals we have.
Yeah. What does everyone think about that?
I think it's a great idea. I'd say eliminate those. And I think was it 4 zones or 3 zones? I can't remember which one it was, Nate.
Yeah, I think it was only maybe 4 zones.
But
Right.
to me, that would simplify things. Several of those have the double AB footnote that I find confusing, and that sounds the description is confusing. So I just think it opens up more possibilities, and it makes our goal of actually allowing mixed use development to happen in more parts of town. It makes it viable, which seems like a good goal.
Bruce, or I see Fred, you have a hand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm inclined to eliminate the numerical specification as well. It seems like we're talking about built up parts of the town, that this might be a productive and comparatively non-controversial way to approach it.
And I mean, assuming it goes through the planning board to council, I think the clear way to frame it, assuming the whole planning board agrees, is basically, hey, council, you just approved the plan. Here's a key component of it that we're making easier. So are you going to shoot this down? Like, it's just counterintuitive a little bit.
It's like a good preamble
With better words, but yeah.
to the motion, to the amendment, not into the zoning language itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can make for the planning board next week, I can make a chart just simplifying and saying like these zones, here are the residential uses, single family, two family, apartments, townhouses, and just show, for instance, even if we change it, right, in the commercial district, it's like, apartments and townhouses aren't allowed. And so really the only thing you're doing this for would be mixed use buildings. And RVC, it's like townhouses are special permit and apartments are site plan review. So, right, there's still the permitting process still is going to occur. It's not like we're changing that. It's just the additional lot area per unit. All right.
All right, good. Side note on that, Nate, what's the tool you use when you want to look at a map with the different zoning? Like I can only ever get PDFs, right? They're not very interactive to see all the different zoning. Is there a better way to visualize these things? Like in the town GIS viewer or whatever it's called, can you layer in zones on that? Maybe I'm just not skilled enough.
Yeah, I'll share my screen in a second. Yeah, there isn't
Like for example, in this case, it'd be great to show
yeah.
the map and then have all four of these zones show up at the same time. So we can
Yeah,
see what we're talking about, but I don't know how to do that.
okay, let's
And I'm not saying we need to do it right now. I was really
yeah.
just curious.
It'd be so nice if we had that capacity, but we don't, do we, Nate? I mean, y'all probably do, but
It's not, I'm not sure. So here's if I went in on the town's website, if I'm on the home page and if I go to maps, yes, this is the public doing it. Huh. It's interesting.
Yeah, this is what usually happens to me. But I thought that was just because of my personality.
That's interesting. I usually go through staff maps. So Bruce, you had mentioned something about this, and didn't quite sure what you meant.
I usually
Um,
go through the property cards, then there's a map, and once you get to the map, you can change things.
yeah, so I'll just go instead of here, I'll just hit maps, and then I'll do property information. Looks like the maps are down. Hmm.
I usually go to the zoning bylaw page, which has a map.
Yeah, but that's
To
a static PDF.
no, there's also a GIS map, but and you can change what shows up, but you can only show all the zones at the same time. It's the first hyperlink
Okay,
there.
great. Let's try that. Oh, okay. So it brought us in. I don't know. That's interesting. It's a public viewer, so yeah. So I agree. So you can click the legend tab over here, and what you can do is then click on and off a few things. Um, in terms of the zoning. Oh, sorry, we're in the property map. If you're go to the zoning map, and I'll go to the legend again just to see. You can click off a few things. So you can click off the flood prone conservancy and FEMA and any zone overlays, design review board, multi-use park district. So you're left with just the base zoning districts. If you hit refresh and then zoom in, you'll see just the zoning districts. So any overlays like U Drive overlay or aquifer protection won't be shown. So here you can see in East Amherst, the districts we were just talking about, changing. Here's the commercial district, Hamshaw Lumber, South Whitney Street. So commercial along here. Here's RVC zone, then BVC's here. So, those are in BVC's up here. So if you make changes, would it encourage now someone to try to do, a building in some of the RVC or BVC? And is someone going to be concerned like, oh, now, there's a big property here. Are they going to do a mixed use building here because now there's no additional lot area? I mean, if it's already a big property, there's already potential in terms of what they could have done, just hasn't happened. So this is the way I would do it, Jesse. and it's if we want, and then if I need more or different layers, I usually have staff, or sometimes I go into ArcMap, the actual mapping software, but it's
You can't change, you can't select or deselect specific zone.
no, that's the thing, you can't, right? So
Is
if I
that,
wanted to do that, that's when I would ask staff to do something.
and I don't know how this works. Is that something that can be suggested for this public space? Because it's,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's just a coding issue. They're all there already. But like,
It'd be so
I don't know
helpful.
how that works with the town.
We had just talked about this, and I think, I'll follow up with that.
Great.
Yeah.
When I was trying to find where the office park was, it was such an annoying endeavor because it's just one tiny little spot. But
Right. And it's similar to maybe light industrial. So you're then,
Yes.
Colors are similar.
because once you zoom out too much, it just, it looks like a Kandinsky painting or something almost. So, all right. So I think, so that's, so, so for mixed use buildings, if we think we have some suggestions, the idea would be at the planning board next week, we can discuss this. So that the agenda was for last night was really just to talk about the East Amherst study, where we're hiring a consultant to look at East Amherst and look at ways to try to increase density or assess zoning. And then, then the next big agenda item for next Wednesday will be the kind of the housing subcommittee and staff's zoning priorities. So some of it would be, if we think mixed use buildings, we can share it out and have the planning board then talk about it as a full planning board. And the idea would be, if we wanted to move quickly, then to get, referred to council, we're on that path. And then there's the other priorities, which might be moving a little slower, but still to share with the planning board. So ideas about student regulations. Then we had, additional items. So, we had, student housing, cottage style housing.
Hey, before we move on,
Yep.
quick things. One, I'll apologize for eating my lunch, but it's only time.
Mhm.
But two, given how some past things have gone from us to the full board, with this one specific piece, what I suggest is we actually craft the amendment with that justification language and give that to the board as soon as possible in advance of next week, and then have the discussion with the full board. Versus just opening the discussion without a document. And I know some of the board members will show up and not have seen it, and that's fine. It is what it is. But at least then we're moving closer.
Yeah. So, yep. I think in the I'd started that for, it's hard because the way our zoning bylaws written, everything's in, different different documents, but I had developed something for just the standards, the non-residential component. So, everything in bold would be changing, the 75%. So, we're not changing, we're saying, sorry, in the BG and BL, it stays the same as it has been. And then in these new districts, or the districts, we have the 75%. And so this is actually what the amendment would look like, in the zoning bylaw. And so we're not removing any text, and we're just adding stuff in terms of that 75% of the facade to a depth of 24 feet. And then we have these other conditions we had talked about, picking up on the mixed use overlay that, to the extent feasible, majority of the street facing facade shall be built along the width of the lot frontage. So it's not, they're not going to put like the, the narrow end, and be located along the minimum front setback line to reinforce the street edge. And then mixed use buildings behind a mixed use building still have to have some mixed use component. So these are just the standards and conditions from the U-Drive overlay. And I hear you, Jesse. So then what I can do is take that dimensional table and do something similar, and then have, a paragraph or two to describe the reasoning. And
yeah, and I mean, maybe then the conversation at the planning board starts with just sharing that and reading it out loud, so that everyone's sort of on the same page and no one can say, I never heard about this, I'm not ready, blah, 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 whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Bruce, go ahead.
We chatted about this last time, and I don't think I asked, but we've got the downtown design standards gestating, developing, basically maturing, behind the screen, so to speak, at the moment and over the past years. And that's principally the RG, the BG, but not entirely. So some of these zones do kind of impinge upon the study area, I think, for the downtown standards. So what we're contemplating, which was written down there, Nate, how does that jibe with what we will be seeing from the downtown standards? So I have read through that, but I can't remember everything. And so it occurred to me that, well, maybe it's a question. To what extent should we be anticipating the design guideline downtown standards in what we are proposing here? And secondly, to what extent, if any, is there conflict or variance with what may be coming versus what has been put in there? Is that something we should be concerned about, or at least mindful of, let's say?
Yeah, I like being mindful of it. I think there's a reason to modify the mixed use building standards, and this is something that perhaps if the planning board, if it's discussed, we could get it moving, and this year. I think the design standards, excuse me, the idea is to have them. We're trying to get a public meeting in mid-March, and then the planning board will see them in March or April, and other boards will. But it'll be a 6-month or multi-month process of public input, and then the final standards will come back, and then then the question is, how do they get implemented? And some of it's zoning changes, and some of it's maybe adoption of the planning board rules and regs. And so I would say let's try this, because if we don't, we might be waiting a year at least. And so
Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting we don't do it.
Yeah.
I was just
Yep.
saying, is there, I mean, it may be, the answers could be, it's going to be somewhat at variance, but basically that's a BG thing, and we're not talking principally about BG.
Right.
That could be one. Number two is we don't really know yet. Number three could be, well, it's heading in the same direction, and it may be complementary, or it could be our thinking should inform the design standards. That would be another
Sure.
way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't think they're inconsistent. I think in the BL it's interesting, Dodson has come up with some ideas, and it may be that in the downtown area, what they're proposing, it's no longer BL. So it's a new zoning district, because, I think to me it's like, to chip away, like we're just trying to figure out, like, oh, we want to change this non-residential component, but now we have to change the additional lot area and all these other things. I think some of what Dodson's doing, I think, just architecturally that doesn't affect zoning, but because some of their ideas do, all of a sudden it's like we might have to adjust like front setbacks, building lot coverage, right, lot, maybe floor area ratio or something. And so all of a sudden it becomes more complicated. And I think if this were to move forward and be adopted this year, and then all of a sudden we find that it doesn't quite work in the BL because of with the standards, I think we'd have to make an adjustment, but I think that's okay. I mean, it might be the reality that.
Okay. That's the answer.
Yep. No, but it's a good point. I hear Jesse said this last planning board meeting, like we'd hate to keep waiting for a study and then, wait, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, over a year, it's like a year and a half's gone by and we still haven't moved this. And so
Gotcha.
Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is just looking at the proposed changes to the use, is it table, whatever, the Excel spreadsheet you just pulled up.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand the second point that you have as changed in the RVC and BVC and BN and COM is, to the extent feasible, a majority of the street-facing facade shall be built along the width of the lot frontage and be generally located along the minimum front setback line to reinforce the sidewalk street edge. That makes total sense to me. My question is, when we have a property at a corner, maybe this is silly, but this was, I think you drew some examples of this at Pomeroy, like a lot on the corner of Pomeroy. Where is there any direction here about which street? Would it be both streets, creating effectively an L-shaped building?
Yeah, I think and it's to the extent feasible. So I think
Okay. Okay.
I think that's a
Okay.
qualifying term that so
Gotcha.
someone could say, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thanks. That was just wanted to make sure I understood that.
yeah, yeah. And I think, for the what I had done with the where are we? Sorry, a lot of folders. I was going to share one other thing I'd done was taken the current mixed use building standards, the 75% and what buildings have, and I've showed areas of what it actually looks like. So, just um, for everyone to get, all right, I think I had two. So is this visible for everyone?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is down at Southeast Street Commons behind the Foreign Savings Bank on Southeast Street. It's a relatively new building, maybe I forget how many years, a few years ago. And they built it as a mixed use building before we had the 30% standard. And so what's showing in purple is as far as I can tell, is what's really the non-residential component. The blue is showing what 30% would be. And the red is showing 75% of the facade length to a depth of 24 feet. So, this is Southeast Street where the first floor plan is. So the building, there's only one street here. And so it's just a showing here's what the differences in space would be, based on those, standards. And then
That's a good diagram.
5
Hmm.
University Drive, I did the same thing. So Angus, to your point, on University Drive, we said that Amity Street's excluded. So here's University Drive. This is the one that was just recently permitted. And so currently they actually is the blue. So they're actually proposing 44% of the ground floor. So typically zoning's a minimum. Someone could always do 100%. So
Right.
they're at 44%. 30% would be the blue. And then the standard in the overlay is what's in red. So 75% of the facade length along University Drive to a depth of 24 feet. So you can see the difference depending on the size of the building, what's first floor. So you have a building like this, you actually have a pretty big first floor. So 30% is large. And anyway, so that's the difference. So if we, in those few zoning districts, we went to that, you'd have this as a minimum. And I think we said, well, that's what we're trying to do is activate the street and have enough, space for some, still mixed use component in a building.
Right. So, sorry, maybe you said this. I was thinking of something else.
Yeah.
How is it determined which street counts?
So, if this were, say in this example, if this were all in one zoning district, and we'd say, well, this building has two frontages, but that qualifier to the extent feasible. So someone might come in and say, well, I'm going to come here. I need more green space and I want to have a bigger entry drive here or something, or, there's wetlands here. So I need to push this over here. So that's how that would be looked at. Um,
But
you know,
like, I'm thinking of other examples like, um, a major like Main Street and then one of the little side streets,
right.
corner property
Yeah.
there, like that we were just discussing.
Yeah,
Who,
I think
who determines that it's Main Street and not the side street that's the frontage that we're
Yeah, well, it could be Pine Street and North Pleasant Street, for example.
Right.
There's two equally busily traveled streets.
Yeah, I think so. For instance, Angus, to your point, like here's down at the Pomeroy intersection, here's the newer roundabout. And so say this property were going to be redeveloped in a mixed use building, we have these standards. Someone would say, well, it has two frontages. I could see, well, someone could say, well, I'd really like this to be mostly built out. And, the board could say, I think to an extent, some of this should be too. And so maybe then, you end up, getting a building that's kind of like an L. But yeah, it becomes a discretion of the permit granting authority of how that is interpreted and applied.
And could I ask one other question,
Mhm.
just to make sure I'm fully understanding this correctly?
Sure.
So the whole purpose of this is essentially reducing the non-residential percentage on that ground floor from 30% to 25%.
No, so there's two suggestions at the subcommittee has made. One was a waiver to that 30%. So, maybe to a minimum of something. And then the other one, which we already have in the bylaw on University Drive, is 75% of the facade length. So, if it's 100 feet, you have to have 75 feet to a depth of 24 feet. So I think the thought there was that, either some component of the facade length that supports upper floors, and then 24 feet's a minimum, but that's typically if you have a double loaded corridor, it's like, how wide is a building? And it could be, we could say to like half the width or something, but 24 feet isn't, could fluctuate, but that's the idea. So
Okay,
So it's
I see. I'm sorry. Thank you.
so in this example, if here's the building and we said, well, here's 75% to a depth of 24 feet, this isn't necessarily accurate. Perhaps and it was saying if the darker red now, this becomes the mixed use area, the non-residential area. And then along this thing would be 75% of the facade length to a depth of whatever. So it's like that.
And just to be clear, has the planning department taken this to any developers to get a sense of? I mean, I know that y'all have been in conversation, and this seems like something that would make it more likely that mixed use buildings would be built. But have y'all gotten any specific feedback on this proposal?
When for University Drive, Tom Reedy came in, when we were talking about 70 University Drive, it was changing ownership. And the question
Right.
asked at the planning board, and he said this standard is much, much better. And he represents a lot of developers. We've heard, I think I've heard it's better. It's interesting. I think some developers, because the housing market is so strong in Amherst, they would rather just do apartments. And I think that's where, we'd want to say, well, in these village centers, we want to have some idea of, and preserve some ability to have non-residential space. And so, I think ideally they'd say, well, it's a lot easier to rent residential and it's more profitable than commercial space. And, they might be right, but is that really what we want in terms of a longer term vision for these areas? And so,
Yeah, because what's right now, the buildings have longer lives than they used to.
right.
When I was started out, 35 years was considered to be the life of a building. And that's not the way the industry thinks anymore.
So I think in this instance, Angus, we've heard some. I think I think in other zoning amendments, it's important to hear from the developer community. Say, for instance, like if we were looking at this, like the 40Y subdivision method, and we will. But I think, say, for this kind of mixed use building thing, I know we have demand in our village centers, for residential and commercial space, and so I don't want to lose that, kind of non-residential space, that opportunity. And so I think, Bruce, to your point, Dotson, I think, in one of their suggestions was in some of these village centers, or maybe in the BL, was to, in mixed use buildings or any building, design the first floor so that it could be converted to non-residential space in the future. And I don't know, I've asked around and some people say the difference really is only in height. You have to have a taller first floor. It may not change the actual construction method. So, in terms of like cost, you build the shell and it can be a residential unit. I don't know how likely in the future that would be converted, but
didn't you also point out that there are other problems with that around use types because
yeah,
of
and
venting and hoods and like whatever, right?
Yeah, if you don't take into account like, oh, now I want to put a restaurant in and I need a vent.
Vertical chase, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the history of building, at least in my lifetime, has this all sorts of interesting theoretical presences around this kind of thing, about how you create the opportunities for flexibility and adaptability, because people noticed that existing places were being turned into things that they originally weren't intended for, but then they started, as you say, noting, well, how can we facilitate that a little easier rather than causing people to have to really, make it less of a Sisyphean effort. But there's always going to be difficulties in that regard. I think you're right that the floor height is probably one of the main constraints, and so you can, and then once you build floor area to a non-constraining dimension, that then allows the other problems to become apparent, because otherwise they wouldn't become apparent, because you only get to the second hurdle if you clear the first.
Right.
So I think we have to be mindful of that's the way the whole process proceeds and so forth.
Yeah, I think, and so right, and I don't even know, like say about like soundproofing and life-saving systems, all these things. But I think for the mixed-use buildings, I think what we're proposing is will help, right? Angus, to your point, and then I think what could happen in the future, is examining then in our village centers, what are the non-residential uses we allow? I think we're pretty good. So someone could come in, but for instance, we don't allow if someone came in right now, say there's a new mixed-use building down by Pomeroy, like I said, someone built this new building and someone said, oh, I want to come in and do like a fabrication lab, do 3D printing and do kind of a startup space. You know, we look at our zoning bylaw, the building commissioner, and we say, well, gosh, is that manufacturing? Like, what is that? And if the closest use classification doesn't work, then that use may not be allowed in a mixed use building. So in the future, what we might have to do is modify our use classifications if we realize some of these mixed use buildings aren't being filled. I think the next question is it just that we don't have a market for traditional retail and commercial, or are our use classifications prohibiting something? And I haven't heard that they are, but it could be that, for instance, right, like these uses that are no longer really producing like noxious side effects or something, because traditionally we wouldn't say we don't want industrial or manufacturing uses in a mixed use building, but in our bylaw, the way we classify those, some things that may be fine today weren't 10 or even 20 years ago, and so they wouldn't be allowed in a mixed use building. But
yeah,
to your point, Bruce, flexibility, right? Like we haven't addressed that, and we haven't heard that it's a problem, but maybe in 5 years it is. I don't know.
yeah.
All right.
Hmm.
I'm looking at the time. Are we ready to move on to a different topic, maybe?
Jesse, could I say one thing
Of
that
course.
before the end? I'd like 5 minutes of the group's time because I have a phone call with one of the people I talked to 3 years ago,
Great.
and I want to make sure that I ask all the questions that we all want to know the answers to.
Sure. Actually, that's perfect. Why don't we do that next? Because then I was going to suggest we talk about North Amherst overlay and try and reach some resolution, at least among this group, what we want to do, if
Right.
anything. So, but Bruce, let's have that conversation first.
Well, this is precipitated by a possible interest in minimum distancing regulations and the generals that third strategy of failing to force the university or the institution to build more housing on campus by whatever means, or failing or deciding not to modify our zoning standards so that we can build denser student-focused housing close to campus on non-campus land. And then the third general strategy seems to be this minimum distancing approach, where you first of all define the student home that you are trying to regulate, and then you put some kind of geometric regulatory structure in that spreads it or puts it at maintains a density just below the threshold of a cascading exodus on the part of the existing residential occupants and so forth. So the one town in the country that seems to do this and has done it for quite a while, the State College. I had talked to Ed Leclerc coming up 3 years ago, and I thought maybe I should go back and talk to him again, find out, what's the story, what's changed in 3 years. Is this still working? Did I clearly understand it properly when I started? Because I've had now 3 years of other things. So I just wanted to check back in with him, and I also wasn't even sure that he was still in the job. Well, it turns out he is, and he responded to my emails. He'd be delighted to talk. We've got a conversation scheduled for 2 o'clock tomorrow, and I'm going to basically explore their or revise my understanding of their minimum distancing regulation. And also, yeah, well, that's basically what I'm going to do. And I thought, is there anything? I mean, I don't think this is a route for us. It may be in certain places and so forth, and that's the thing. But I thought, whereas I don't think it's the main event for us, I thought this is an opportunity to understand it as well as it's possible to understand. And given that we did have a resident petition on this topic not so long ago, I thought I'll do what I can on this. So that's my agenda for tomorrow at 2. Anything that you particularly would like to find out?
That's great, Bruce. Thank you for doing that. I think my first question would be, have there been challenges, legal or otherwise, to the A, definition of student home, and B, the distancing strategy? Like what have the local landlords done in response? Because if to be honest, I haven't given up on this idea of most of the definition, but it's clear to me we need to be persuasive. We need more information and hopefully examples and data to say, yes, this held up under this kind of legal scrutiny in this instance or something like that. But I don't know if that's true. And like, if he can point us to, oh yeah, I don't know if they have a town council or a town meeting, whatever. If he can say, yeah, go back a year ago, these meetings was really contentious. Look at these conversations, like that kind of stuff might be useful for us to think about.
Okay.
Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, I think similarly, the questions that I have are one, what was the rhetoric around student housing at Penn State before this?
He might not know because this has been in place for a long time. It's been modified progressively, I think, but I think it's
Okay.
been in place for like 20 or more years.
I guess what I'm kind of asking is, has this been effective, basically, right? Is student housing not an issue in State College? Uh, so, and that could be, it might be hard for him to have a sense of whether that problem has been solved. But if there's not a rhetorical focus and, you know, on student housing like there is here, that says something. And then I think the other question that I had is if they've, similar to Jesse's, I tried to look at Pennsylvania's state constitution, but I'm not a lawyer, so kind of ran into some roadblocks there. But it seems like they have uniformity clauses similar to Massachusetts, and so I guess wondering if they've ever run into problems within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania's the Commonwealth as well?
It is. I think there's 5. I think it's Kentucky, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, maybe just 4.
Actually, it's any statutory, I guess. Okay, I've got 5 questions
Nate,
to add. Nate?
Yeah, I was just on their webpage looking. They call it a student home license. I guess the question would be, do they regulate it in both zoning and it looks like it's all zoning and maybe this license program, which maybe is or isn't zoning.
I see. In other words, have they got like a rental registration bylaw level regulation as well as a zoning bylaw level regulation?
Right. It looks like they have a student occupancy limit for one family with an apartment and a 2-family dwelling. That's kind of their definition in zoning, but then they have this license program that is something else. So I don't know if the two work together or how it's structured.
So maybe it's similar to what I just said to you both yesterday.
Right.
So maybe a permit or license, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with Jesse. I'd love to know, like, if this has been challenged. I will say that since the last few planning board meetings and with Jeff here, we've been talking about it and we've been talking to different staff and getting ideas and what the town attorneys have said over the years. And it's really interesting. I guess, Bruce, my question would be, like, has anyone mentioned fair housing? So they define a student home, a student, or they define a student, I guess. I don't, as any person attending undergraduate or graduate programs offered by colleges or universities. So it's basically a wide net. And so we've been told that, you can't really say undergraduate, it's like all students. So I don't know. I'd just be curious to see if anyone's mentioned anything about fair housing.
Okay. Any fair housing challenges?
Yep.
Well, I think that's. Oh, Angus is. This is probably going to be a 30-minute, 45-minute call, guys. So,
This is important. Yeah.
but
I guess, well, the question I have, Bruce, I'm trying to understand the ways in which, on the one hand, State College seems really similar to us. On the other hand, it also seems really different. And so, like, one of the things that I'm struggling with, just like looking at information about it, it's really small physically. I mean, at least what I'm seeing is that it's like almost 4.5 square miles, and Amherst is like over 25 square miles.
yeah, there's a
So,
borough there, I think, and I stumbled over this last time when I was trying to get population comparisons and stuff, and
uh-huh.
I don't. That was what I was going to follow was what are the jurisdictions there? There's a borough and there's a town, and I don't. So I think I'll ask something like that question: is to try and get a sense of because it could be that the problem is in in the neighboring, in the abutting, whatever it's called, municipality. I
Well,
don't know.
and I think part of the reason I'm asking this is that it seems like there's more built up towns near State College, possibly than us. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense of like, in what ways is this comparable to Amherst, and could be mapped directly onto our situation, and in what ways is it different? Because if students can effectively live just across the border from State College in neighboring areas more easily than they can live in, say, Sunderland, right, which doesn't really have a whole lot built up right across the border, and that's actually kind of far from UMass, or So anyway, I'm just trying to get a sense of like, because the students are still going to be going to UMass, and so
Yeah.
they will need to be somewhere. And if we make it very difficult for them to live here, I just want to get a sense of like what we're doing to our neighboring communities, and how that worked in State College.
Okay.
Here's a
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, it looks like State College is a part of Center County, but it has, a pretty big population. Yeah, I was going to follow Bruce. My only question was, does this apply town-wide or their student stuff, or is it limited to certain zoning districts? I think it's limited by use, but not by district, but I'd be curious to know.
So you're talking about the minimum distancing requirement.
Right. Is it, is it everywhere throughout, say, State College, or is it only within certain areas? So it's like, you have, essentially, right, you create this like leapfrog thing, right, where it's like, okay, you have one and another, and then it's like, it goes all the way to the boundary, or is it?
I just emailed you all a quick Google search, gave me an article titled "Downtown High Rise Raised Debate Over State College's Future" from 18 months ago. So
thank you. All of that.
That's about
This isn't. I guess I threw my net into a school of fish here.
Thanks, Bruce. Though this is it's really helpful because it's out there. And the town's 2015 market study mentioned it. The consultant RKG mentioned State College, and it's been mentioned before. And I think understanding it is important because I'm not sure. I kind of want to write if their state legislation enables it differently than Massachusetts would. And then there's fair housing, which is federal, which I'm interested to see if they've run into.
Well, Nate, what I could do at the end of the call is just say my colleague is planning staff at in Amherst would probably have more specific and targeted questions. Can I introduce the two of you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And having broken the ice, I think he's, as I recall, last I called, he was a very agreeable sounding and kind of fellow, easy to talk to. And I can't remember his background, but no, there was a fellow elsewhere who had worked as a planning director or planning in Massachusetts. Although he was in Charlottesville, and was able to tell me about Charlottesville, he was able to bridge the gap to Massachusetts because he had spent a lot of time working there. I don't think that's true of Ed, but I could find out, or you could, where else he is. So I will make a point at the end of the call of keeping the door open and connecting the two of you so that you could have a continuing chat. I will have the talk. I will write it up, what I've discovered. I will circulate it here and back to Ed, as I usually do. What I did last time, he reads it, he says, "Oh, no, that you didn't quite understand this," or actually, in addition to what you said, there is this. So there'll be some amplification, presumably, of what I write from him briefly, and then I'll leave the door open for
Great.
well, various doors open.
Thanks. Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question for Nate. Thank you, Bruce, for this. This is going to be really helpful. Has there been any push from the planning department to actually get a legal opinion from the town's whatever lawyers?
Yeah, we've started that. We haven't, asked for like a strict legal opinion. We've essentially, what we're doing is, since a few planning board meetings ago, I've been cataloging the questions. So even from today, I'll take a few, and we're scheduling time to try to get this to them. So it's all come about. There were questions similarly like, could Amherst become a seasonal communities? We don't. There's that seasonal communities designation that the state put out, and so we're just exploring that. So right now we're just kind of formulating the questions to ask, and then we will. The idea is to go to legal counsel and ask, and and then also maybe reach out to other resources too. Whether it's the state or other things. So right now we're kind of just in the question gathering phase, doing research, and then trying to present something. So but the questions are like, can we define a student home, right? Can we have minimum distancing? Can it be, if not in zoning and general bylaw? So we have probably a number of questions and considerations we're getting ready to discuss. So yeah, that'll be happening in the next few months. I don't know how easy it is to get an answer.
So, I
you
was
know,
about to comment on that. If and when you get there, Nate, I've only been involved with this all a couple of years, but the few times we have gotten some kind of response, which mostly came through you, my recollection is the response was, well, that could allow someone to start litigation.
Right.
Rather than a response of, yes, we think this would hold up. Like it was very frustrating to me because the
Right.
position was clearly, well, we shouldn't do it if there's any chance of litigation. But the question to me is, do they think it would stand up? Not
Right.
would there be lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, I think some of it would be, Angus, also then working with the town manager's office, right? Like what's the best route, right? So we can work with our attorneys at we work with KP Law, and from there, then what are, like Jesse said, what are the next steps? Is it do we think they have a case that some of these things could work? If not, we're also trying to, as part of this conversation, my questions have been, are there other things we could do? So if we, for instance, if minimum distancing doesn't work, are there areas where we could actually zone for student housing, right? So kind of have some other approaches and then see if that's even possible, right? So it's like, if you can define a student house or student use, one question, if so, then can we put it somewhere? And then if we can put it somewhere, can we then restrict it elsewhere? So, there's kind of different considerations about, anyways. So the answer is yes, hasn't happened yet, but we're getting the list ready. We've let the attorneys know it's going to be coming.
Sorry,
But
something just occurred to me. The flip side is very important also. Because the goal of defining student housing or home, in my mind, is one, so we can intentionally figure out where we might allow bigger density. But more importantly, or equally important, is to help non-student housing, is to encourage, as we keep talking about, long-term resident, young family, young professional, allow that market to develop again, which is non-existent in Amherst because of the cost. And so the flip side question is, if we can we define a student home? Yes, no. Could we define a non-student home? Yes, no. Like, could you define some other category that would have other requirements? Full-time residents, year-round residents, income levels. I mean, I don't know what the possibilities are.
Let's say a non-seasonal house.
Right, exactly. Like that's another question I would have for legal opinion.
yeah, I think, what we've been told, zoning typically doesn't get into, the occupancy. And so what's hard with seasonal communities, they defined, it's specifically short-term rentals, and then they say anything like 10 months or whatever is considered full-time. The students in Amherst, they typically sign 12-month leases. And so,
Yeah, it's challenging.
So it's hard to say like, oh, well, they're only here, whatever, less than 10 months, but legally they're on paper, they're here 12 or more. And so, I
I
just
don't
want your
know.
question.
Well,
Yeah.
a household where the average age is less
Right.
than 22.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what
Yeah.
other levers you could make up, right?
Right. Right.
Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, well, as a landlord for 53 years, yeah, I write 12-month leases and typically to graduate students, and they are absolutely here 12 months of the year.
Yeah. Okay, just in the last few minutes, if we can switch gears a little, let's talk about North Amherst overlay. And I really feel like this group should at least decide if we think it has legs and want to push forward or not. And there's been clearly back and forth. And last, I feel like we talked about it. I guess it was when Jeff was at or no, it was one after he visited full board and we talked about it, and we weren't even agreed, I think. So I don't know really how to start the conversation other than just say, well, my opinion is I don't see any harm in trying to move forward.
I think the concern is that it'll be defeated,
Right.
and I've said that ought not to be a concern. It's something that you bear in mind, but I don't. And I think I sent you, Jesse, didn't I? I got my 2 or 3 step opinion pieces around 700 words each, which I haven't yet. But I was thinking that we could test this out with in the Indie or actually basically in all of the outlets, the media outlets in town, and see what happens. Maybe soften up. But the essence is, in my approach, is broaden the argument, I suppose you would say, by starting off saying, explaining what I think the options are. So state the problem, and the problem is that we are a unique town. Making the case, say that, having spoken to a number of towns and so forth, these are the solution concepts that towns like Amherst have, and then go through them and state the pros and cons, and basically say we're going to try all three, and the first cab off the rank for the number 3 or number 2, whatever, is North Amherst, and we should look at that.
Yeah.
So I think we should. I think we should. But then I also understand that from your point of view, which is to say from staff's point of view and time and so forth, I understand that there's a dilemma here, because on the one hand, you probably don't want to put a huge amount of time into something if you're pretty sure it's not going to fly. But on the other hand, if we don't put some amount of time in it, it doesn't fly because the wings aren't strong enough.
Yeah.
So I would like to think that we could somehow, and maybe it's because of effort that I put in as a draftsperson, perhaps under your tutelage, that will take some of the load off you, that gets us to a product that is worthy of being discussed and moved forward. But I think we should do it.
So really what I was after is the 4 of us. So presumably this will go to planning board, it'll have to be a vote to move it to council. And all I was really after was, what would the 4 of us likely vote? Because if we're 2 and 2, for example, I doubt we'd get there with the full board. And that'd be telling for me, right? About time spent.
Okay, well, you've heard me.
Right. So Fred, maybe you're up next, then I guess just tell us what we think. And like, no pressure, of course. It's like, we want to make good use of our time.
Well, I'm in support of moving forward, and I would add an argument here that even if the council defeats it, we are then in the position of being able to say with the next thing we come forward, there seems to be a consensus that we need more housing, and we have demonstrably addressed that, and it is not on our it's not our responsibility that it failed. And I think you create a stronger argument for whatever comes next.
That's a good point.
So,
Yeah.
Thanks. Angus, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think Fred and Bruce both put it well instead of you, Jesse. I think it's worth trying. I understand that it's as far as it sounds like as far as the planning department is concerned, it's maybe not as high a priority or is likely to succeed as some other things. And I think that's fine. I think, I'm alive to the issue that us putting time into this and then it going down to defeat means we're not focusing on other things. At the same time, I think this mixed use idea is great, and Nate's done a ton of work on it, and I feel like it's going to move forward. My goal is before the next subcommittee meeting to try and do work on combining the OP and PRP and making some changes with housing. So, I think we're and then there's this East Amherst stuff that we're thinking about. So like we're bringing together a bunch of different areas of town, a bunch of different proposals to try and increase housing, targeting different kinds of populations. And so I'm with Fred that like if the town council does not want to move forward with this, that's fine. I'd love to hear the town council's thoughts on where to house students and how to deal with the student housing issue.
Good luck. I agree.
Yeah.
Hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Bruce said it, the time and effort by staff, and then is it politically, viable. So I think, I think I said this, but I'll do it. I just made a note to myself I'll compile all the North Amherst documents and I'll send them out to the subcommittee today. There's been different drafts and iterations. So yeah, if the subcommittee wants to work on it and bring it to the planning board, what I would recommend is getting basically a zoning amendment and maybe an introductory. Bruce, you've already written a fair amount. If there's the bones and pieces are there, kind of a informational narrative, and then the actual amendment and a map. Have the planning board discuss it. So yeah, and then Angus, to you, the housing and the PRP, that's something I'm looking at and working on too. So I have kind of a framework for that as an overlay, allowing a few different residential uses with some new dimensional standards. I will say with the PRP, for instance, say there's like 150 acres in town, like 30 of them can be that are undeveloped and that probably could be developed. The rest, a lot of it's wetland or resource areas or steep slopes or something. And so, when staff started looking at it, there's pockets of like 3 to 5 acres here, maybe 7 here, but there's not really, 30 big acres where you could do something interesting with terms of like, say, like a subdivision or something, so it's still worthwhile. I think, what it does is it gives flexibility. So as an overlay, the existing zoning still in place. Someone can still do whatever is allowed in PRP. And then there's this option of doing some residential uses. So I'm hoping to get that kind of to the planning board in March, or the subcommittee to look at, see. Yeah.
Great. So sounds like we are agreed. I also would love to make this not work for you, Nate, in the meantime. So yeah, please send us that and maybe we'll try and get things together. The planning board, and we approach it just as trying to get to a goal with the full board of, if not a vote, a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, should we move this forward? And then worry about what's next.
Yeah. And next time, perhaps we could spend a moment on the 40Y, which is another whole issue that seems to have opportunity attached to it.
Yep, great. Okay, great. I've got to run. Thanks, everyone.
Apologies for being late.
No
I
worries.
wasn't paying attention. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you all
See you
soon.
later.
Bye.